is the festival, the Biennale Festival. It's the most important festival of the world. When you read the roster of the artists, the orchestras, the conductors, I think it's unique. No other festival in the world gathers in the same couple of weeks or 3 weeks so many incredible artists. The festivals are an interesting venture all over the world, and basically they are those places where we, how can I say it in a way that doesn't make angry everybody? It's one of those ventures where you can do many things that you usually cannot or are not supposed to do in the season of the theater. So it's the place where you can break the rules in a certain way, you know, and do maybe a different piece that you would never do in the theater, or do a concert like today when you talk with the audience, and it's not a normal kind of concert you would do in an abonnement of the Musikverein, for example. I mean, you would do that. So it's a way of breaking the rules with charm in a certain way, no? And also, in the case of the Enescu, because of the power of this festival, it's a chance of having one after the other some of the greatest artists in the world, where normally if you want to have them all together, you need to travel the whole year around the world to catch them all. And here, all of a sudden, you have them all together. 2 years ago, it was, of course, completely other thing. You were right now telling me, and this is interesting also for the audience to hear, you were telling me, do you remember me? And of course, I hardly remember you because we were all with masks 2 years ago. So I may remember your eyes, but the souvenirs of people are very liquid in a way, no? Because everybody was covered. And that was a hard time because Sala Palatui, for example, which is a huge place, as you know, we was only permitted to sell half of the hall, which is 2,000 seats. It's a lot of seats, half of the hall. But still, the Palatui seemed empty with half of the people. And not to talk about the losses in the box office, of course, the loss of incomes, etc., which is very important to pay the expenses of the festival. It was a hard time, but it was also a hard time where everybody put the best in order to make it work. It's one of those situations in where the best of everyone comes out.
What about the repertoire tonight? It was very different. How would you describe it today? Tell us a bit about the repertoire.
Well, the Argentinian songs are basically music on great poetry. The text in the Argentinian songs is not just an excuse for the music to exist, but it is a piece of art in itself. You can read the text without the music, and it's an amazing poetry. So that is not very common. It is, of course, in the great pieces of music, but it's not very common for this type of music that is associated also to folklore in a way, to the traditional music of my country or of any country. So the public, it's a mixture of pleasure because of the amazing music, but also frustration from the public of not being able of understanding exactly the words that gave a reason of existing to the notes. You know, it's very important when you sing in a language that is not the language of the place, that to have subtitles or things like that. Of course, in the Athenaeum this is not possible technically. So on the other hand, we have an incredible acoustic, so you cannot always win in everything. But in this type of programs, it's very important. In general, in concerts, I communicate with the audience because it's one of the great advantages of a concert is the fact that you're not pretending to be a character. I mean, I'm an opera singer, okay, you know this. So when I'm singing an opera, I'm a character. The character cannot interact with the public. When you are conducting, if you're conducting a very serious symphony or a very serious piece, you just don't tell jokes to the audience, of course. You may say good evening or thank you or something, but you don't establish a communication because that breaks the concentration of the piece. But in this case, where each song is 2-3 minutes, 1 minute and a half, 2 minutes, and they're so different, and the public basically don't understand what I'm saying, it's important that I try to put them a little bit with 2, 3, 10 words in the mood of the song that I'm going to sing. So if they don't understand the text, but they understand more or less the mood, the feeling of the song, then they enjoy it better.
Or was it challenging to sing and conduct at the same time?
Well, but in this kind of music, I really sing and conduct only when it's absolutely necessary. In this case of a program, can you imagine only with 18 musicians as we were, in the intimacy and the delicacy of the songs, to having a conductor there in the middle, giving the back to the audience, would break the magic completely.
And put a barrier.
And put a barrier in between. This is one of those cases where it's better to do without conductor. And not without conducting, but without conductor. And of course, I don't do a big conducting because it's not necessary in this music. I'm just watching, I'm supporting and giving an attack or an alert if I see, because of course this music doesn't belong to the orchestra repertoire. It's also new music for them, and they are not used to do it. And they need me to cue them in here and there, or to remind about the color, about the word, about an accent. But in general, it was a very minimalist conducting. Just let them do, because it's a chamber orchestra, and it's a great chamber orchestra. I mean, it's an official chamber orchestra. It's not a small group of people that we gather together for the piece. It's an orchestra that plays together as a chamber orchestra. I mean, I love to conduct my own music because, of course, I know exactly what I want of it. But I also love, and I've done it several times with other conductors, and it's also great because they bring in an idea that maybe you didn't see, because when you are in your own thing, you lose perspective sometimes. And someone who comes from outside or hears from outside or is not so emotionally involved with the piece, have more perspective, and maybe in that perspective can see something that you don't see. So it's not always great just to conduct yourself. It's also good to have someone else. It depends on the type of composition, of course. If you talk about my Requiem Mass, which is 1 hour and a half of music and a lot of people on stage, it's a religious piece. If you talk about the Te Deum, which we premiered 2 years ago, then it's a religious piece, and some people who studied it and analyzed it, they said that it's like a cosmic piece, where you can feel like cosmic creatures, call it angels, call it whatever you want, that are part of the piece. But when you talk about, for example, the concerto, the guitar concerto, then it's another complete other thing, because I wrote it during COVID, and the concerto has this confusing appearance of melodic simplicity that then evolves, and it's full of cluster and dissonance and this organized disorder inside the piece. And this is because it's a reflex of what we were all living in the COVID period. So the music that came out was that. It's a music with a message, in a way, of we have this mess, we have this disorder, we have this dissonance, we have these frictions among us. And in the middle of all this, we still have the melody, we still have the love, we still have the sun, and let's try to fix it. That's why the name of the concerto is Concerto para un Resurgir, which means concert for our research, for our rebirth. Not doing the second and the third movement, of course, is not possible to understand the whole message of the concert, because the first movement is that one about the mess. So then in the second one, it gets better.
Generosity through music is the motto of this year's festival. Do you think there is a link between generosity and music?
Well, there's one thing, I cannot tell you which is the link exactly, because I would be preaching and that would be too much at 1 a.m. But what I can tell you is that music with egoism, which is the opposite of generosity, doesn't work. So maybe that's the answer. Because one thing is the ego. There's a fashion now of considering the ego as a negative thing. The ego is not a negative thing. The ego is what makes me different to you. It's my ego, my I, myself, and you're yourself. So the ego is not the problem. The problem is the sicknesses of ego. The egoism, the egolatrism, etc., etc., etc. Those are the problems. If the ego is sick, then the ego is a problem. If it is a healthy ego, it's not a problem. And egoism is not giving yourself ego to the others. And this is not a way of doing music. It's impossible. If you are on stage without giving yourself to the others, without, how can I say, emotionally naked on stage. If you are not emotionally naked so that people can see you the way you are. I mean, what we did tonight was that. Here I am, guys. Let's have a nice time together. You know, I'm sweating, it's hot, I need to drink, etc., etc. We need to tune several times because it's very humid. I mean, this normal humans rapport, which is what we are losing with all these machines we have today, which are great for many things, of course, but they're dangerous for others because the moment we lose the human factor, the moment we don't feel the need anymore to come to a concert and see a guy or a woman or an orchestra on stage sweating and suffering and being nervous and concentrated, giving their human best to other humans. If one day we stop feeling that as necessary, we will start the end of the humankind, I think.